Fox News alert: the president's former national security advisor Michael Flynn pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI. President Trump fired him after it was revealed he lied about his communications with Russia's ambassador. And now he is admitting in court to lying to federal agents about that contact. This is Outnumbered. I'm Sandra Smith, and here today, Harris Faulkner, Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Booth, commentator and Fox News contributor Rachel Campos Duffy, and today's #OneLuckyGuy co-anchor of America's Newsroom, Bill Hemmer, is here, and he is outnumbered.
Can't get enough of us, can we?
And it is a busy day.
America needs more.
Good afternoon, yeah. Thank you, ladies, for having me.
All right, we want to get straight to John Roberts. He's on the North Lawn of the White House with an update there. John Roberts, we want to get straight to you. Anything changing at this moment?
Good afternoon, Sandra. I'm glad to see that somebody else is working for the network besides you and Bill this morning. That's good to know. We do have a statement from Ty Cobb, who is the president's attorney on the Russia investigation, who's working inside the White House counsel's office. He has outside counsel as well. Ty Cobb is working inside the White House. Ty Cobb, in a statement released just a short time ago, said, quote, "Today, Michael Flynn, a former national security advisor at the White House for 25 days during the Trump administration and a former Obama administration official, entered a guilty plea to a single count of making a false statement to the FBI." He goes on to say, we can put that screen back up, "The false statements involved mirror the false statements to the White House officials, which resulted in his resignation in February of this year. Nothing about the guilty plea or the charge implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. The conclusion of this phase of the special counsel's work demonstrates again that the special counsel is moving with all deliberate speed and clears the way for a prompt and reasonable conclusion." So Cobb in there is basically saying there's nothing here for the White House to worry about, but there's that one phrase in the statement where he says nothing about this guilty plea or the charge implicates anyone other than Mr. Flynn. But we do know from this plea agreement that Flynn has agreed to cooperate with the special counsel's office, testifying against anybody that the special counsel might want him to, and that could include the president, that could include his lieutenants, that could include members of his family. But then there's also the information in the plea agreement that Flynn was in contact with senior transition officials at Mar-a-Lago on the 29th of December about having conversations with Sergei Kislyak. The information says that Flynn phoned down and talked to a senior transition official at Mar-a-Lago to say, "I'm going to talk to Kislyak. Should I talk to him about sanctions, and what should I say?" Flynn got off that phone call, according to the information, made the call to Kislyak, and then reported back to the transition official what had been said during that conversation. Now, we know, if we were to take the president at his word from a February 17th press conference, that it was not the president who told Flynn to contact the Russians, because the president said, "No, it wasn't me who told him to do that, but he was doing his job, and had I thought about it, I would have told him to do it." Now, again, we're taking the president at his word that that's in fact what happened. But who was it from the transition, if not the president, that Flynn was talking to? And that would mean, if you do the timeline, someone else knew exactly what Flynn had talked to Kislyak about before he lied to the vice president. So to me, what we've seen so far in this plea agreement, that is a very, very key issue that we need to get a little bit more clarity on. And those are clearly some of the questions that we'll be asking the president, who's got an Oval Office spray with one of the leaders from Libya coming up. And we'll obviously be in contact with White House officials throughout the day. But that, to me, is the key part of this plea agreement that opens up a whole lot of other questions. Sandra, back to you.
He is the fourth person charged in connection with this Mueller investigation. What can this, or what does this tell us about that investigation going forward?
Well, the fact that none of these charges actually relate to collusion with the Russians is interesting. I mean, we've got plea deals about making false statements in two cases here. We've got indictments about business dealings. But so far, there's nothing in here about somebody colluding with the Russians to influence the outcome of the election. And other than making false statements to the FBI, there's also no indication that anything that Flynn has done even borders on illegality. I mean, talking with the Russian government when you are in the transition team about to take over the administration is not a legal offense. I mean, it's something that you would expect that a transition would do, is make contacts with foreign governments. Now, if you are acting as sort of a parallel government trying to influence the Russians into doing something while the Obama administration is still in power. Well, that could be seen to be, at the very least, bad form and may go beyond that. But there's no suggestion in any of this so far that Flynn did anything illegal other than lying to investigators. Sandra?
Important to make that distinction. John Roberts, thank you for your reporting on this. I'm sure we'll see you again in a bit.
You bet.
All right, Harris.
All right, our Catherine Herridge was the first to alert us to a key section of all of our what we've learned today, and that's that a senior member transition team had direct contact with Russia and others, according to what we're learning today. Catherine Herridge, let's bring her on board right now. Catherine, what is the significance of this, and what's the sourcing that's on the record?
Okay, so Harris, I was in the courthouse and in the courtroom when Mike Flynn pled guilty to lying to the FBI, and part of that is a long process where the judge makes sure that Flynn really understands the constitutional rights that he's waiving by pleading guilty. And in that process, a member of the government, the prosecution team, said, and it's now in some of the records that have been released by the court, it states very specifically that on or about December 22nd, so really the heart of this Flynn record has to do with these days before and after Christmas, after the election. It says this very senior member of the presidential transition team directed Flynn to contact officials from foreign governments, including Russia. And this had to do with a UN vote and how those countries would vote at the UN on an issue related, to the Middle East. So the question is, who is this very senior official? And as John Roberts just said, there are really only a handful of people who fit into that category. I would just connect a couple of points here. What we learned in the last 10 days is that Jared Kushner was interviewed by the special counsel in November, about 2-3 weeks ago. So you can see that the special counsel has been pulling together people to help build the body of evidence against Mike Flynn. Just a couple of other things, if I could. When you look at these records, and it talks about the degree to which Mike Flynn is going to cooperate, it says here he will do so fully and on whatever basis the special counsel requires. Earlier I spoke with someone who's very close to Flynn, who said to me he entered into this agreement for a handful of reasons. He was broken financially, he was broken emotionally, and that his family could not face another 2 to 3 years under the sort of the lever of the government in the Russia investigation. And just because he's made a plea agreement today, he's pled guilty, doesn't mean that he's off the hook with the special counsel. In many ways, because he's already admitted to lying, he's under additional scrutiny about the quality and the fidelity of the statements that he makes in the future. And the records are very clear that he cannot refuse to cooperate with the special counsel at this point without facing a penalty. What's typical in these cases is that the deal is off the table, Harris.
Bill, I know you've been covering this all morning long, and with each hour we get so much information with what Catherine just gave us, though, and you may have a question for her. I'm curious to know, Catherine, if you're still with us, how this actually impacts the look now at those senior aides in the transition to Trump. Bill, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, Catherine, I think it's terrific reporting. To boil it down, I think what the White House would argue today is that all this happened post-election. Democrats who have been very critical of this White House prior to the transition process, they're going to argue you're a long way from getting to a final conclusion. And I think at the moment that's kind of where we are right now.
When you look at the records that were released this morning by the government and what you heard in the courthouse behind me, it's clear that Michael Flynn was playing a role as a go-between, sort of operating between this sort of sweet spot with the incoming administration and then also with foreign governments, and specifically what's cited here is contact with the Russian ambassador. One of the central complaints of the Obama administration, which does appear to be borne out by the records today, is that there could only be one administration at a time, there could only be one president at a time, there could only be one administration at the time, and this really goes to their argument that the president's team was really moving very quickly to embrace their new responsibilities, yet may have gotten over the tip of their skis in some respects, because this is not in the Flynn case with the contact with the transition team at Mar-a-Lago over the Christmas period, this is not a single phone call. This is a reporting back and forth. Here's what we've got. I've talked to the Russians. Here's what they brought back to me. This is what we're taking back to them. So this was a very active back and forth process. It was not a one-off. So when you look at this issue of collusion, I think it becomes a question of whether the glass is half full or half empty. Is this a kind of coordination with the Russians that is out of character for an incoming administration, or is it completely in character, which is what the President Trump's team has maintained so far?
All right, we had on Alan Dershowitz on our network yesterday. I spoke with him, and one of the things he said was that, we need to get ready for some sort of a deal to come from Mike Flynn. He was aware of his financial situation. In fact, today it's being reported that Flynn is looking perhaps to sell his house very quickly because he's out of cash and needs that.
That's confirmed. That's confirmed.
So
that's confirmed.
What Dershowitz, though, was saying was that he would sort of put him out there to be able to talk about different people, to be able to point to different things. And what I hear you saying, Catherine, is the FBI is going to watch even closer now to make sure that whatever he offers up is absolutely the truth.
Look, Flynn has made this deal, and I spoke with someone close to Flynn after the hearing this morning, and you can't see a plea agreement as putting you in a position of strength. It puts you in a position of weakness in the sense that you must fully cooperate and provide information to the government that they request, because they always have that lever to break the deal, cut the deal, or they have the lever of, when it comes to sentencing, to what degree did your level of cooperation mitigate how much time you will spend in jail or how much money you will have to pay in federal fines. So he's, this is not a day where he's off the hook. This is the day where he's kind of gone down a path where he's under further pressure and further scrutiny. And based on the records that are released, he must fully cooperate, and he must do so in a fulsome way, in an accurate way, and to the best of his ability. So this would take you to not only paperwork, because that's what it says in these records, but it would also take you to individuals as well.
Catherine Herridge, thank you for your excellent reporting on that. I'm sure we'll hear a lot from you the rest of the day. Bill Hemmer, I want to ask you, moving from what this means for the investigation, what this means for Michael Flynn, what does this mean for Donald Trump and the White House?
Great question. I can't answer it. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't think anyone here is. I think Ty Cobb's statement is interesting. Right. He is suggesting it's a very isolated matter. I think what Catherine reports on the anguish that Mike Flynn has gone through for the past 11 months, one could argue, is that I think a prosecutor would take his evidence and say, we flipped him. And we'll see what the White House has to say with the defense about that later today. But if you're building a case from a prosecutor's standpoint, this is where you stack things up. But where it goes, I've got no idea, and none of us do.
What confuses me is it is not a crime to speak with the Russians. It's a crime to lie to the FBI that you spoke to the Russians, and it's still not clear to me as just a regular citizen how unusual it is to have these conversations with foreign governments, which I think happens all the time. And the other thing I would point out is the only crime we actually do know of is the unmasking of Flynn, which was a crime.
Lisa?
Well, now we know lying to the FBI is
well, and that as well, yes. But aside from that.
And I would just ask this, because, Lisa, you and I were talking in the green room before. When you say met with Russians for the transition team is one thing, but if it was talked about the exact UN vote sanctions that we were trying to put forth with regard to Russia, and then there was talk about policy with regard to Israel, there are 4 things that he's purported to have lied about that he said today, I am guilty of that. Right. And so I would want to know legally the texture of those things.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm interested in this as well. And John Roberts and Catherine Herridge sort of touched on it as well. And I think kind of we're sort of questioning the same thing that we're questioning, in the sense of clearly we know that transitions teams talk to foreign governments. So at issue is, what were those conversations, and were any laws broken in those conversations? Catherine had mentioned, depending on how you look at it, obviously Democrats are going to look at it on the collusion front. But I think we're going to learn a lot more about the nature of those conversations in the coming days. And that is where I'm interested in learning more about, because we know that transition teams do have these conversations with foreign governments, and that's not an illegal thing. And actually, it's something that every transition team does. And another issue here as well is Flynn had put in the statement, he talked about, this is the best thing for my family. We know that his son was also caught up in this as well. And so I wonder what scrutiny is being placed on his son, and if that was the impetus and part of the reason as well that he came around and wanting to work with Robert Mueller.
Every time we have a transition of power in the United States, when one administration is replacing the other, we can see the pattern that they have. They want to have better relations with Russia. Right. Time and again. I don't think the Trump team was any different. And I know for a fact that General Flynn went to the West Wing as National Security Advisor. And part of his strategy was to build a better relationship with Moscow, so you peel Moscow away from its relationship with Beijing. And that was a strategy that was stated on record in the West Wing last January.
So why did he lie about those meetings then?
Well, you're going to have to ask them.
Yeah, right? So I mean, what you're saying is absolutely, those are the facts, but then also the fact is that he admits lying.
What I'm arguing is that this was part of the Trump policy to build the relationship with Moscow and see if you can build
previous administrations
and forge a better relationship.
But does anyone else, I wonder how this is going to play with a jury as well, because we know how much credibility does Flynn have? I mean, he's lied about everything under the sun.
Dershowitz says none.
He's lied about,
he says you put him on the stand and one side will say this is a guy who can't tell the truth about anything, and then the other side will say, well, he tells the truth about some things.
So is it smart of Mueller to reach some sort of plea deal with him, considering the fact that he's not a very credible source?
I don't know
he's
that the goal
lied about
is
everything
to put him
under
on
the sun.
I think the goal is to try to squeeze him just like they did Paul Manafort.
But is that information reliable?
And, you know, they do a no-knock door raid on him, and they just apply pressure. And then this investigation spends all sorts of money and can go in any direction it wants as it applies pressure.
And we know from the reporting that he did speak to some high-level person within the Trump transition team. We don't know who that person is, and if that person has testified that they did or didn't order Flynn to have these conversations. There's that angle. But I would just say on the, taking the legal stuff aside, I'm not a lawyer, politically, what you see happening is the Democrats are really hoping that this is going to taint Trump's campaign or agenda and bring back more of Russia.
We don't know about that.
And we don't know if that's going to actually have this effect. I don't think it will.
We do know, and we can say, that today's movement continues the story.
We are going to get some real legal analysis here with Judge Andrew Napolitano in just a second, but I just wanted to get this in here. Jeff Flake now to vote yes on tax reform.
Oh, my.
This situation,
there's a lot going on today.
This is unbelievable, this drama. So let's get to Judge Napolitano, and I will promise you we're also going to get to taxes here. This is a huge day. Can't believe it's a Friday. Judge Napolitano, get in here. We need you to tell us what is going on. What do you make of the latest with this?
Well, I think this is probably the tip of a prosecutorial iceberg, so to speak. It's a nightmare for Donald Trump, because General Flynn was his constant companion on foreign policy and national security matters from June of 2015 till the time the president fired him in February of 2017. The downside for the government is that whatever testimony General Flynn provides is coming out of the mouth of someone that the government itself has acknowledged is unworthy of belief, because he's pleaded guilty, as we know, to lying to the FBI. The downside to the president is, as one of you was just saying, this keeps the Russian thing, the Russian story, front and center at a time when the president is beginning to move towards the achievement of his legislative agenda.
That's a very good point.
General Flynn probably will be undergoing the process of being debriefed by FBI agents in a painstakingly detailed way in the next couple of weeks. They're looking for evidence that leads to other evidence. By that I mean they're looking for human beings who can testify so that General Flynn doesn't have to testify.
Exactly, because he's been proven not to tell the truth.
Well, correct. You can provide evidence to the government without going on the witness stand, and that's probably the role they see for him.
Hey, Judge, we want to get Lisa Booth in here because she's got a quick question for you.
Hi, Judge.
Lisa.
Hey, Judge. So question for you. We know that transition teams talk to foreign governments. So why does the conversations that Flynn had, why do those conversations matter? And what is that issue with the conversations that he allegedly had?
That's a great question. The conversations that General Flynn had while he was part of the transition team are of far less moment than any conversations he had during the campaign. I mean, at the time of the transition team, one would expect that the Trump foreign policy and national security people would begin to dip their toes in the water, so to speak, particularly after the president is inaugurated, but before there's a new Secretary of State. So what happened during the transition time period, unless it is a cover-up of what happened during the campaign, is far less problematic for the president today than what may have happened during the campaign. The portions of the plea agreement that I have seen go to conversations during the transition period, not during the campaign.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Judge Andrew Napolitano, thank you for jumping on the phone and weighing in. Whether or not Republicans have enough to pass tax reform in the Senate, that has long been a question. Jeff Flake, as I just mentioned, is now a yes. Okay, so we've got a lot going on this busy Friday afternoon. We're going to get to that story on the other side of the break. We'll be right back. Fox News alert, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell telling the AP that, quote, we have the votes to pass tax reform. We are awaiting a floor vote in the Senate expected today. Could come at any time. After some last-minute drama nearly derailed that bill yesterday. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill, where there's nothing going on there, huh, Mike?
Sandra, good afternoon to you. Everybody I've talked to today says they have at least 50 votes, enough to pass tax reform. What is unclear at this point is the timing. The two wild cards in terms of senators were Bob Corker of Tennessee and Jeff Flake of Arizona. Flake is now a yes. He says that he got the leadership to get rid of what he considered a budgeting gimmick, and he got a commitment from the Trump administration and Senate leadership to work on a DACA fix for those children brought to this country illegally. So he is on board. We await an announcement from Senator Corker. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson tweeted earlier, I'll be voting yes on tax reform. Appreciate Senate leadership and POTUS' willingness to work to close the gap between pass-throughs and C-corps on the business side. There's a lot of work still to reconcile Senate and House bills, and I've been assured a seat at the table during those negotiations. Another Republican confirmed he's a yes first thing this morning on Fox and Friends First.
The outcome here is going to be able for American business to win, creates more jobs. It will raise wages. So this tax plan is going to put more dollars directly in the pockets of hardworking Americans through lower taxes, but it's going to increase wages.
At this stage, we expect action on the Senate floor, voting on a variety of amendments, what they call around here a vote-a-rama. Then ultimately on final passage of the bill, which a number of Republican sources say they will definitely do. The Senate Democratic leader is ripping the tax package.
It's time for my Republican friends to admit the error and come clean with the American people. The fact that we received the dynamic score only a day before a final vote on the bill shows just how foolhardy it is to rush a bill like this through.
The latest guidance I'm getting from key sources is they expect a vote-a-rama sometime later today, and they plan to finish up tax reform tonight. We will see exactly when. Sandra?
All right, Mike Emanuel, thank you for that. At the bottom of Jeff Flake's announcement or statement that he has declared he is in support of this now, having secured both of those objectives. He laid out exactly what he was asking for. I am pleased to announce I will vote in support of the tax reform bill. Breaking
news. Do we
news.
think it's a good bill?
Well, can I get a question?
Well,
I'll
frame do we know? And we will not know for some time. I think that is the argument we can have.
Well, I was just going to say that this could move quicker than we think. Everyone's assuming that we're going to go to conference. But it is possible that if they fixed the state and local tax issue, which,
right,
and we know that
which
Senator Collins
told me that they were on the road to doing.
They were on the road doing something Senator Collins was really wanting. What could happen is the Senate passes the bill and the House just accepts it.
Yeah.
And that could move things much quicker because, believe me, the Senate doesn't want to go back and wrangle all these votes again and have any problems.
You know,
so that's a very interesting thing that could happen.
There was a lot of intent and hope built into the explanation of this bill. They intend for the corporate taxes to be reintroduced into American investment. Will it happen?
I believe it will.
I don't know.
Well, and
I will tell you,
historically it
on
has,
the individual side, just being home last week in Ohio, talking to a lot of family and friends. I asked every single one of them, what do you think of the tax bill? So few could tell me what's in it for them.
And Bill,
therein, I believe, lies a problem.
You're laying out the other side of this for Republicans as well. When the bill is passed, then they have the job to go and sell it to the people that you're talking about, to sell it to voters in the midterm elections, explain to them how this bill will benefit their lives. And that's not always the easy part.
Small business likes it. They'll tell you they've had the,
but to the average
strap
American,
of regulation.
No, they
The average American is
well, one name comes to mind when you talk about passing stuff and then finding out what's
Well,
in it.
right, that
Anybody
sounds
wanna
like
guess? Nancy Pelosi.
That's right.
And so the Republicans don't want to go down that road.
Right.
I think that they have been talking enough about what was in the House and what was in the Senate and their differences for us to at least get a flavor of that. But you're right, if they skip conference, we won't know a lot of what went into
I'll tell you what, though.
the changes and the concerns.
But the president and the president has a lot of credibility when he's been out on the stump promoting this tax bill. He has deregulated at a speed that has really jump-started this economy. I think that when the president went out and said to the American people, some people called it a rambling speech. I thought it was a really fun speech to watch that he had this past week in Missouri. But I think that what you're going to see is that the American people go, this guy has got the economy better than it's been in a long time. He says this is going to work, and I think the people believe him.
You know, we all watched for Ron Johnson and Daines and McCain, and I watched for Rand Paul. And remember, from the beginning of this, the president felt confident that he had his vote on tax reform. Rand Paul was the guy who said, if you don't repeal all of it, I'm never, ever, 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 ever going to say yes about Obamacare. He was the person who then said, I don't know about tax reform, but he had him from the get-go.
He flipped on Monday to a yes, and it seems like so long ago.
I feel like
Right?
I've got the popcorn out watching the horse trading going on over the past 24 hours, and that, well, I'll give you the small business to Ron Johnson. Susan Collins now has power asking for, SALT deductions, wanting to put that in play.
But I think Bill,
let's hope it all makes it better.
Bill asked a reasonable question, though.
Yeah, we're saying all the
How big
things
is this at the end of the day? Is it, as you've been asking, Bill, the generational tax reform that this president has promised? And what sort of growth are we even talking about here?
We got a scoop, but it's big for the deficit, so that's something else that the Republicans will have to talk about as well.
That's true.
Slow news
Got
day.
awfully quiet when I mentioned that word deficit. We are monitoring developments in Detroit. We are awaiting a news conference outside the home of Congressman John Conyers. He's facing calls for resignation over sexual misconduct allegations and some money paid to a woman to keep quiet. Stay close. On a very busy Friday, this Fox News alert, we are awaiting a news conference outside Congressman John Conyers' Detroit, Michigan home, after a string of sexual misconduct allegations popped up on Capitol Hill against him. When asked if this will be an announcement about his resignation, a spokesperson says, quote, that will be addressed, end quote. All this as Conyers and Democratic Senator Al Franken are facing growing pressure to step down over sexual harassment claims. And this is happening as support for Conyers quickly evaporating as 3 of his 4 Democratic colleagues in the Michigan delegation are calling for his immediate resignation. Congressman Dan Kildee, the first Democratic congressman from Michigan to call for Conyers to step down. Watch.
I think Congressman Conyers should resign. No person, no matter where they work, should have to tolerate the kind of harassment that's been alleged.
Also calling for Conyers to go are House leaders Paul Ryan and Nancy Pelosi, plus Minority Whip Steny Hoyer. And meanwhile, the Senate Ethics Committee has opened a preliminary inquiry into Senator Al Franken of Minnesota, hours after another woman said he groped her. But despite the firestorm, both Franken and Conyers are showing no signs that they are going anywhere. Now, the news conference could change that for Conyers. We'll have to see. But Al Franken now had 65 members of local active politicians in Minnesota, some of them women, saying just a few days ago, defending him. Crickets. Crickets.
You know, I think it's bigger than Al Franken. I think it's bigger than John Conyers. I think it's a question of how our government is going to right its own ship once it emerges that it's bigger than we even understand. And how you can take taxpayer dollars and make payments on sexual harassment claims.
I want to make a statement about that.
That should simply be unacceptable.
It is unacceptable, but I think we also need to take into account that's a $17 million fund. Only one of those cases was a sexual harassment case against a member of Congress, and that was settled for, I think, less than $200,000. So
who was that?
They haven't said who that person is. But also note, Conyers' it's not Conyers. Conyers paid for his out of his MRI, which is his member budget, which is totally crazy that happened as well.
So that is that's still taxpayer dollars.
So, oh, yes. I don't think that should happen. I'm just saying, you see a $17 million fund, and you might assume there's been $17 million worth of payments made to...
No, I don't think anybody assumes that, but what we know about that fund is that it deals with all sorts of discrimination.
Yeah,
racial discrimination, sex discrimination. So actually, that actually doesn't make the argument any better for what they need to do to
there shouldn't be
put some sunlight on that. So Congresswoman Blackburn, I think, was with you too this morning, right? And she was part of that bill, that bipartisan bill that they put forth yesterday, in terms of exposing some of the names of the people who were using that slush fund for different sorts of things. And that's really when you can do the actual drill down on who paid whom for what and what was really being...
Some of that's leaking right now.
I think just part of the problem is people hear this, and it's just like that goes to that trust issue of our government. I mean, you're married to a congressman, and I'm sure you deal with this on a daily basis, but I mean, these are much bigger problems that Americans look at. It's taxpayer dollars. That's one problem. Another problem is they're running the country.
Absolutely. There's a
major trust issue here.
But it's not just trust. I also think it's an issue of fairness, because I think a lot of Americans are saying, if I did some of these things that Representative Conyers is being accused of, I would get the boot from my, I would be fired from my job. There's no way my career would withstand this scrutiny. So I think there's an issue of fairness at hand. And I also think if you look at the Office of Compliance and the barriers that are put up for these women, or, regardless if it was sexual harassment, whatever the incident is involved, as we mentioned, the $17 million, there are various things involved in the claims that were reached. But you look at the barriers put in place, and the deck is stacked against the individuals bringing those accusations. So on Capitol Hill, we are seeing changes. A House resolution passed for training. There's a hearing next week for the House Administration Committee, I believe, on Thursday, talking about this as well. So this is going to be an ongoing conversation on Capitol Hill, as we will all be listening in the coming days.
So the bigger point, Bill, with regard to the money, might be that there was this slush fund out there that would pay for anything the taxpayers wouldn't know about.
A lot of people have come on TV and said they knew nothing about it. Look, this is a sea change in America. It's happening in real time. It was Russell Simmons yesterday, it was Garrison Keillor and Matt Lauer the day before, it was Charlie Rose 10 days ago. Who knows who it might be by 5 o'clock this afternoon and into the week next week. And it's going to go into, it will go into different sectors of America. And I think collectively how we react to this and how our relationships with each other change, perhaps, is something that we have to be attentive toward. I know I think about it a lot more just in my interaction with my own colleagues.
You're a complete gentleman, Bill Hemmer.
Yeah, you're such a nice person.
Kind of say that. Thank you.
But Bill, I've thought about Bill, I've thought about that as a political spouse too. Some of this was pictures taking, and I think political people, especially men, are going to have to be more careful about how they take a picture with somebody or what they do, because you don't want to have any
one thing
doubt.
Is for sure. As these people come forward, daylight is the greatest disinfectant, right?
Agreed.
So, I mean, we have to follow the stories of these victims as they come through and make sure justice is served. I mean, that's important to do. All right, so speaking of justice, wow, what a day. General Michael Flynn, former national security advisor for the president, and worked with the team, the transition team, the Trump transition team, has now pled guilty to lying to the FBI on at least 4 different matters having to do with Russia. We're following this today because now it has come out that he is now, in his testimony with the officials, willing to tell a judge and willing to say in court that he was directed to do what he was doing with Russia by members, senior officials among the Trump transition team. And around we go. We're following this. Stay close to Fox News Outnumbered. You're watching it.
After
After a long fight, the Justice Department releasing documents on the infamous tarmac meeting between former President Bill Clinton and former then Attorney General Loretta Lynch. Documents show DOJ downplaying the meeting. One official reportedly writing, quote, Daily Caller, The Hill, and Fox News have picked up a local Phoenix News report about a casual, unscheduled meeting between former President Bill Clinton and the AG. But the then head of the FBI thought it was much more important than that.
I'm not picking on the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, who I like very much, but her meeting with President Clinton on that airplane was the capper for me. And I then said, you know what? The department cannot by itself credibly end this.
Oh, that meeting. Bill Hemmer's on the couch.
Indeed.
29 pages.
It continues to linger.
Well, they just talked about their grandchildren, right?
Yeah.
So it's just
29 pages.
It was for golf.
Golf and grandchildren.
Nice
That
day
is
out.
not a 1 second conversation.
Which, if you play golf with me, is a very short conversation. You know where my game is.
You eagle every hole.
Not even close to that. Look, these records have been kept private for a reason. They don't want a lot of people to know what the Department of Justice is on to here, but we're going to peel this away, and I think in time we'll find out whether or not there was something that led to that whole suggestion about don't call it an investigation, call it a matter.
I love that it was a local reporter. I mean, this wasn't broken by some big, I mean, it was a person on the ground and from the
more
Phoenix.
than you think.
I know. And it really did change the election in a huge way. I think the credibility of the Clintons was sort of solidified in terms of the people's public opinion, and so much by that meeting, because people could see that is not
the phrase in the documents was find that guy, right?
Yeah.
That guy referring to whomever leaked the story. Was it a reporter there in Arizona, or was it an airport worker? That person has not been identified.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, so, I also just, like, does anyone else feel like the investigation was just a formality and, you know, the fix was sort of already in? We know that the FBI was dishonest about the documents that they even had from the beginning about the tarmac meeting. We know that Comey testified under oath. He was told to call it a matter instead of an investigation. President Obama went on national television saying that Hillary Clinton didn't put her national security at risk. So, and we also know that the exoneration letter was drafted before he even gave the announcement about Hillary Clinton. So from my vantage point and looking at all this, it really just feels like the investigation was just a formality.
Well, I would say this.
I mean,
I won't weigh in on the impetus for investigation. You're going to hope that some people were doing their jobs because they should have been. But the very fact that Loretta Lynch has regretted this meeting tells me a whole lot. Right? Yeah. I mean, wished it hadn't happened was kind of what she was getting to. Not only was it inconvenient, but what about her legacy?
I was going to say, it taints her legacy. It really does.
All right. Well, Michael Flynn, the president's former national security advisor, pleading guilty to making false statements to the FBI. This happening just a couple of hours ago. This story continues. A lot of details we still have yet to learn. We'll have more on this story on the other side.